Those who came back from last week, and for those of you who are not here, don't worry, we will get you up to speed, and we're so delighted to have you. We're delighted to have Dr. Mark Baker from the Levine Counseling Center, Executive Director there. He has his doctorate in clinical psychology and his master's in theology, so he's very well-rounded to speak to us today. Last week we learned about how to be a better person, not a bitter person, when it comes to our grief, and he's going to enlighten us some more. Afterwards, if you're interested, there are books and CDs and DVDs available, so just see me afterwards. Thank you, guys.
Good to be back with you today. See all the familiar faces that I saw last week and a couple of new ones. We are I'm finishing a two-part series today on dealing with hurt, sorrow, and grief. And today we're going to focus on sorrow and grief and how God heals us in those areas. I think probably the best way for us to start is to start with a prayer. How about that? Let's start. Lord, as always, we're so grateful that you've blessed us in the ways that you have. Thank you for bringing us to this place today. Pray, Lord, that you would bless our time, that we would learn a little bit more how to be like Jesus. Pray, Lord, that you would bless my words and the thoughts and the feelings of those here. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Yes, my PhD is in clinical psychology and my MDiv is in theology from Fuller Theological Seminary. And my work in life is integrating those two things, putting together the best of contemporary, basically psychoanalytic thought with good Christian theology. I've found that good theology and good psychology are both healing. My books are all an integration of that. The one we're going to be talking about today is this one, Spiritual Wisdom for a Happier Life. We'll be dealing with the chapter on sadness out of this book. It just came out last year. I've found that happiness has gotten a bad rap in Christianity. We've said, you're supposed to be joyful, not happy. Have you heard that before? Philippians was all about joy, and joy is independent of circumstances, and you should make happiness your goal. You should make joy your goal. You should be joyful. Forget happiness, right? I think it's a short sell. I think that if you make good choices, you'll have a happier life. If you make bad choices, you're going to have an unhappy life. And this book is about how to help you make good choices in life. Your circumstances do determine your happiness, but your choices often determine your circumstances. So this is all about choosing wisely in life, and we're going to talk about sorrow and how to deal with the sadness in your life today to have a happier life. I'm actually interested in a little bit more happiness in my life. I'm going to get there by making good choices. I can. All right. The first question I'm going to ask today is, what does it mean to be sad? What does it mean to be sad? We're going to talk about sadness to start today. Let's start with a famous verse from Ecclesiastes 3, chapter 3, verse 4. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh. There's a time for everything. There's a time for sadness and there's a time for happiness. There's a time for both. And in order to have a truly happy life, you have to make space for the sadness in your life. So sadness is an integral part of a life well lived. Now, I think most people come to me for therapy when they're sad, wanting me to rid them of their sadness. They are hiring me to either give them drugs or give them therapy to stop them from being sad, right? And what I get them to see is that the goal of ridding yourself of all the sadness in your life is the goal of a dead person. Live people have sadness in their life. Live people have problems, they have difficulties, they have ups and downs. So our goal is not to rid you of your sadness, our goal is to deal with it, to make meaning of it, to understand it, and understand why you're sad. Sadness is a natural response to loss and disappointment in life. It's a natural response to loss and disappointment in life. So if you've loved and you've had important things in your life and you've lost them, you're going to be sad. That's a natural part of a response to those activities in our life. The important thing that I've discovered over the years when people come to me with various forms of sadness, we're going to talk about many today, is to understand what it means to them to be sad. If you think it means it's a weakness, it's a lack of faith on your part, then you're going to have more problems as a result of your sadness. If you believe that somehow a failure on your part to be sad, then you're going to have more problems as a result of that. So what I've found is that, especially with depression, People who are suffering from depression, the intensity of the depression itself is not their biggest problem. It's what they believe about themselves for being depressed that's their biggest problem. Right? We find too often people feel that somehow I'm failing, I'm not trying hard enough, I should be stronger, I shouldn't feel this way. Because when you look at someone who's depressed, you can't see anything wrong with them, but they feel something is wrong with them. So they feel it's their fault. Often, they feel it's their fault. So whether or not you're suffering from troubling sadness or a clinical depression itself, what you believe about yourself is for having those feelings is critical. I'm going to flesh that out for us this morning. It's not so much the intensity of your sadness as it is what it means to you to be sad. Let me give you an example. It's a woman I'll call Yolanda. All my stories are really composites of people that I see in therapy, and the names have all been changed to protect the guilty. So none of you in this room are parts of these stories. Yolanda is an educated woman, has a good job, she has several friends. She's well liked at her job, she's kind to everyone. She's involved in her church, and yet she has a problem that people can't see when they look at her. She suffers from depression. Depression is something that comes and goes. It's something that you can't tell by looking at someone, but it is often something that results from chemical imbalances in the blood that you can't see. Right? She hates it, but at times her depression overtakes her life. Sometimes she can't get out of bed for the whole day. She'll miss a whole day of work because she can't get out of bed. She knows the thoughts that she has, which are often negative when you're suffering from depression, are not from God, but she can't stop it. She's seen several therapists before she came to see me, and she couldn't stop the feelings, couldn't stop herself from being depressed. Even though she believes in God, there are times when she even wants to take her life. It's a side effect of serious clinical depression or suicidal thoughts. Those thoughts will come into your mind for several reasons, but you need to understand that those are an artifact of the depression itself. So we launched off in a course of therapy, and she would struggle with these bouts of depression that she saw as a weakness on her part. She thought, I'm a Christian. I know I'm going to heaven afterwards. I know that's all set for me. So why do I struggle with this sadness that just robs me of all joy and all happiness in life? I should be a stronger person, she'll say to herself. So she would, throughout the week, after our session, throughout the week, she would start to battle with these feelings of sadness. They would come over and she'd think, I should call Dr. Baker. I'm getting depressed. No, I can get through this. I can be stronger. I'm not going to call him. I shouldn't have to call him. So I'm going to make myself be happy, right? So she's going to force herself to be not so sad. So now she feels guilty, and in addition to feeling sad, because she's fighting with her sadness. And then she has this battle back and forth. I should be stronger. I can't believe I'm still sad. And the sadness would get worse because she can't make herself stop being sad, so she's spiraling down. So by the time she gets to down fighting with herself, after several hours, now she's suicidal. Now I have to call Dr. Baker because I'm thinking about killing myself, and I told him I'd call him before I kill myself. So that's her struggle, right? You can see how the torture she went through in her own mind made it worse. Because she believed it was a weakness on her part. I should be stronger. I should be a stronger person. I should be a better Christian. You even try to read the Bible. You try to read the Bible when you're depressed? It doesn't help. Actually, most of it will make you more depressed. She did not have a problem with a lack of faith. Depression is not a lack of faith. She did not have a problem with a lack of willpower. Depression doesn't result from a lack of willpower. She suffered from a chemical imbalance in her body that made her feel depressed, and she thought it was a weakness on her part. That made it get worse. Fighting yourself for feeling the way you feel will make it get worse. She should have called me hours earlier. We could have had a nice chat, and she could have gone on about her day. She not only hated feeling depressed, she hated herself for being depressed, and that's when you have a problem. When it shifts over from I hate this feeling to I hate myself for feeling this way, now you've got a problem. Because now you have a problem with shame. Right? So if you hate yourself for being the way that you are, depression is the least of your problems. She saw her depression as a sign of a spiritual weakness. To be sad, in her mind, meant that she was unspiritual and it was a moral failing on her part. Now this is something that we often do, you need to understand this. We moralize emotions. If I feel bad, I think I am bad. If you hurt me, I think you're bad. Because you made me feel bad, you're bad. We moralize emotions. We do this often. We do it in the church a lot too. Someone does something I don't like, they're a bad person. Whoa, 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 whoa. You're moralizing emotions. No, they hurt you. That doesn't make them a bad person. It means they're hurtful, and you might want to deal with that. And we do it to ourselves. If I feel bad, I think I am bad. We moralize emotions. You know what I mean when I'm saying that? You make an emotional thing into a moral thing. And now you're battling with other feelings that make your initial feeling much, much more complicated. Well, I helped Yolanda break this vicious cycle, the spiral downward. I feel sad, I feel weak. That makes me feel more sad, which makes me feel more weak, which makes me feel, spirals down. We could break that and say, no, it's not a weakness in your life. You've got depression. You should call me. Let's talk about it. And we talk about some of the things I'm going to tell you today, how you can deal with this depression that you have. It's a part of life. Ecclesiastes tells us there's a time to be sad. This is one of those times. This is your time to be sad. Now let's talk about it. Why are you sad? What's going on? What's happening in your life? Today, Yolanda still battles with depression, but her suffering isn't so intense because she doesn't hate herself for being sad. We're able to drive a wedge there. Drive a wedge. You're sad, okay. You're sad, let's talk about it. But what does it mean? What's going on? Are there reasons for it? Is there a loss that you're being reminded of? Sometimes grief, I'm going to talk about in a second, sometimes it can be triggered for years later. You can be driving in your car, a song will come on the radio. If anybody listens to the radio anymore. Or on your iPod, is that right? Yeah, okay, good. Me too. And boom, you're sad again. It's like, whoa, it triggered that. Or a smell can trigger it. The window's down and you smell a certain flower. And man, the grief comes back and you feel sad again. Those are the moments. You're in an Ecclesiastes moment. It's like, that's a moment to be sad. There's nothing wrong with you. There's no defect. There's no moral failing. No weakness, not the lack of faith. You're sad. So, be sad. Think about where that's coming from. What's that memory triggering for you? Ecclesiastes 3:4, there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh. Both. You will have sadness go in and out of your life. And as I said earlier, people often hire me for what we call a riddance fantasy in therapy. Riddance fantasy means I'm hiring you to rid me of my feelings, right? You're a psychologist. I have these feelings. Sadness is I don't like sad. I'm hiring you to rid me of my sadness. We call that a riddance fantasy. And again, that's the goal of a dead person, to have no feelings. No, you're alive. That means you're going to laugh sometimes, you're going to be sad sometimes, you're going to have ups and downs. That just means you're alive. Thank God you're alive today. Don't rid yourself of your feelings. Try to understand them, embrace them, and feel them back. I'm feeling sad. Why? Why am I feeling sad? Are you reminding me of something? Something going on? Our goal isn't to rid ourselves of our feelings, it's to understand them, embrace them, find out what they mean. Sadness is a part of a life well lived. If you have no sadness, I'm saying you're not living well. You're not living well. You should have sadness as a part of your life. Ecclesiastes tells us that, right? So let's talk about grief. Grief is the sorrow of saying goodbye. Genesis 37, verse 35. Then Jacob tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and mourned for his son many days. Many of the great saints throughout history have grieved deeply, Hearts are broken as a result of losses in their life. If you have loved deeply, you will grieve deeply. They go hand in hand. You cannot love deeply and lose that love without grieving deeply. Grief is a sadness we feel as a result of loss. It is natural to feel grief. Grief is one of the few emotions that feels bad but is good. It feels bad but it is good. It's very important for you to do your grief work if you have lost something you love. Because grief is preparing your heart for new love. That's what grief is. But you have to do the work. Because if you don't do the work, you're going to stay stuck. You're going to stay stuck in the past. You're going to stay stuck with the old love, and you haven't grieved it, you haven't processed it, you haven't accepted it. So now you're stuck. And I've worked with people who've had to grieve for years. Sometimes grief is complicated. So you have to work at it and work through the process to make room in your heart for new love. You have to grieve the loss of old loves, of old attachments. Because it feels bad, you may think something was wrong. I often get that. because grief feels so bad, you think something's wrong. It isn't wrong. It's actually right. It's a process that's natural for our hearts to prepare them for future attachments, for future loves, for future relationships, for future activities. You know the process of grief, right? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. You know, Kubler-Ross's stuff. I'm sure you all know that. Denial is the first stage. I don't believe it. What? No, it's not true. It can't be real. That's when you pick up the phone to call and you go, oh, that's right. I can't call. I think I just lost my mother a couple months ago, and I think, oh, I'm going to tell them. Oh, no, I can't tell her that. Right. With that thought, right? It's not true, is it? Oh, it is true. Then anger. Wrong, this is wrong. I remember when I was a teenager, I lost my grandfather. He was a godly man, probably one of the most influential people in my life. And I remember being so angry at God and thinking, he's doing so much good. Why are you taking him? Take me. Just a kid, you know, I don't know what to do. He's helping all these people, right? Negotiating with God, didn't try that. My arms are too short to box with God. Depression, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, there's that sadness. Now, with grief, often that depression is so intense, it feels like a clinical depression, but often isn't. And you can't tell the difference. And we'll talk about clinical depression in a minute. That sadness can feel very, very deep. If you love someone a lot, you will feel sad deeply. And that's the work in your heart, embracing that sadness, not running from it, embracing it, giving yourself space in your life to feel that sadness, prepares your heart for the final stage, which is acceptance. That's our goal in life. Grief process goes acceptance. We want to get to, well, this has happened. My mom's gone. Grandpa's gone. You know, it's not what I want. I didn't want it, but I accept it. I accept my life. This is it as it is now. Sometimes we walk with a limp, we say, after you wrestle with God, you know, and it hurts you. You walk with a limp, but you go on. You accept that this is my life. I'm going to go on with the acceptance of it now without this important person in my life. So if all goes well, the grief process can take a few weeks, or as I said, can take a few years. But it's a process, and the stages are not linear. Life isn't linear. You figure that out yet? I see enough gray hair to know life's not linear. It's messy. It's up and down. It's back and forth. You know, I thought I was done with the anger. Here I am, I'm to acceptance, and now I'm mad again. You know, wait a minute. I did that step. No, up and down, up and down, up and down. They're back in denial again about, wait a minute, no, you're in denial. You're still sad, and you're in denial about your sadness. Right? So you're going to go all over the place. The stages are not linear. Life's not linear. It's messy, and it's emotional. What you're going to deal with are the emotions in life. If you face those emotions well, you have a chance for a happier life. So we're going to embrace those emotions and the messiness of it. And the stages, we'll call them stages, are real, but they're all just sort of components of the grief process, and you're going to go in and out, all over, up and down, back and forth. And you never really get done. You know this too, don't you? We never get done with anything. You know, we've done a lot of research for counseling couples. John Gottman is the guy who's researched thousands and thousands of couples. You know this name, John Gottman? Some of you know him? Yeah. You know what he says? Couples fight, and 70% of the time, they never resolve a fight. 70% of the arguments you have in marriage, you don't resolve. Sounds kind of right to me, doesn't it to you? I'm married, right? So what is it that you do? You learn to live with respect and love with someone that you disagree with. That's what you do. You kind of come to a place where, well, I can live with that, you know? And I don't really agree with you 100%, but I can live with that. If you respect me, in my opinion, and I respect you in your opinion, we can live well together. But are we going to get agreement? 30% of the time. That's how messy life is. It's messy. It's messy. You got to feel like you're doing more than your fair share, and you got to learn to embrace acceptance. I mean, accept it as it is. It's not perfect. I'll tell you, because my wife's not here, she's close to perfect, but she's not. And so there are a certain percentage of the time when I have to just accept it as it is. And that's the messiness of life, and that's the way it is with grief too. You got to accept that it's messy. It's not perfect. And we understand a lot of things that can help you with it, but it's not going to go the way you think, where you're going to get it done. You don't get it with anything, really. And then there are times when grief is what we call complicated. There's what we call a complicated bereavement in psychology. Now, if you lost someone that you loved and it was a clean relationship, that you felt pretty good, you've come to accept it's only about 30% of the time we agree, you accept that reality, which means you got a pretty good relationship. You can accept that we disagree on all this stuff, but I still love this person loves me. We keep our stuff pretty clean. We repair our injuries as we go. So not a lot of baggage. That's called a simple bereavement. And that can go, weeks or even years, right? Complicated bereavement, well, that can last for a long time, which means it's messy. Like, this person died on me, and I was really mad at them the whole time. And they died, and I was so many things I still needed to say. And I needed to say them, oh, now you're in trouble, because you got a complicated bereavement. It's not simple, it's not clean. And so, let me tell you about Jimmy. Jimmy was the eldest son of a traditional Christian family with strong cultural values, successful and responsible person. He takes care of the people in his family, his parents and his younger brother, who was severely disabled. He had intellectual deficits, and he would care for him. And was very involved in missions outreach in the church that he was involved in. And his parents were very proud of him, that he was a fine, outstanding Christian man who was doing good in the world, very committed to missions. He had this phrase he liked to use. And he was pretty successful financially, but he lived simply. If you knew him, the car he drove, the clothes he wore, you wouldn't know how successful he was. He says, he loved to say this, I live simply so that others can simply live. Ever heard that? Yeah. But he would donate a lot of his money to missions and to people who were in impoverished areas, here in Los Angeles as well as around the world. Well, 2 years before he came to therapy, his mother became seriously ill and died. He was very close to his mother. Then shortly after that, his elderly father died, which sometimes happened. His mission in life then was to care for his brother, and to care for him into old age. And his prayer was hopefully that his brother would pass before he did, because who's going to care for him? It's a dilemma. I know I have a disabled brother. He passed away 2 years ago. And that was a big concern for my mom. She thought she should pull up girls before I did, to take care of him. That was her mission in life, that she would drive over to the care facility and care for him and drive back, up until 90, she was driving over there and taking care of Philip and driving back. Philip passed away. Within 2 years, my mom passed. Her mission in life was over. It's done. Well, she moved her brother in with him, got him involved in the church activities to the degree that he could. His brother improved to his highest level of functioning ever. He was being involved in activities. He was the awkward guy in the room, but he would go and he was there and he was making relationships, and Jimmy was very delighted because he knew his parents would be proud for taking care of his brother. And then, quite suddenly, his two closest friends died just for reasons that were independent. One was in a car accident, and the other from a fast-acting form of cancer, just died. So he lost both parents, two close friends, so his support system of the last 20 years was gone, right? And dealing with stuff in life, he needed a support system. Lost his parents, very close to them, lost his two closest friends. And you can see where this is headed. A month later, his brother died in his sleep. Boom, 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 boom. And no support system to deal with it. Jimmy came to my office on his knees. He said, "This is too much." And I said, "I know." He said, "How could God let this happen?" As I said last week, that is never a theological question. So when somebody asks you that in those moments, they're not asking you a theological question. It's not a question of the head, it's a question of the heart. How could God abandon me like this? All I could say was, "I don't know." Jimmy said, "I've tried to share my grief with others at the church, but I can't stand to be told one more time that God is in control. Christians are useless to me." That's what he said. This guy was a leader in the church. "Don't tell me again that God is in control. I know God is in control. You live my life. You lose everything that's close to you. And then you tell me how it feels. I can't see God." Remember we talked about that last week? "God, don't tell me God is in control. It doesn't feel like it to me," he said. And I said, "How could it?" He said, I don't care what their motives are. These Christians are useless to me right now. I've been faithful. I've been obedient. I've been of service. How could God be so unfair? Remember that? It was chapter 1 we talked about last week. The least helpful thing in those moments would have been for me to say, I know how you feel. Platitudes only make it worse when you're in those moments. You want to feel that people understand how you feel, but in the moment you feel they don't. That's an artifact of trauma, is to feel very, very alone. The psychological result of trauma is to feel very alone. He lost too many people, he lost too much meaning, there was too much disappointment. Like Job said, when I lie down, I think, how long before I get up? The nights drag on, and I toss until dawn. That's right out of Job. Ever had those nights? I have. It's a part of life. And if you have complicated bereavement in your life, you're going to feel that way for a while. So you're going to feel meaningless and pointless. The nights are the worst. Getting through the night, you just, how much longer before the day comes? It's an awful feeling. And I'll say again, this is not the lack of faith to feel this way. It's a side effect of complicated bereavement, of deep grief. It's a side effect to feel this way. It's not lack of faith. It's not lack of willpower. It's what you feel when you lose that many things that are close to you that fast. As we talked about last week, C.S. Lewis said, Christianity creates rather than solves the problem of pain. We believe in an all-loving, all-powerful God, and yet we still feel this bad sometimes. That's the problem of pain. That's the moral dilemma of pain. How do you go to a God you believe is all-powerful and he's letting you suffer like this? That's a complicated problem that we have to solve. And yet going to that God is the solution, even though you don't feel that it is. Intense misery disconnects us and it makes us feel very alone. And then Jacob tore his clothes and he put on sackcloth and mourned his son for many days. Even the greatest of all saints have felt this way. Roll up your sleeves, embrace the process. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, work. We call it grief work because it's work. You have to roll up our sleeves and do the work. Just because it feels bad doesn't mean that it is bad. You know, Freud had the belief that all psychological problems come from the inability to grieve. Interesting, isn't it? Your problems come that you don't want to face grief anymore. You don't want to do the work because it's work. It's hard. I don't want it. I don't want to grieve. You don't want to grieve? I don't want to grieve. But if you don't grieve, you're going to have psychological problems. You got to roll up your sleeves. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and go in and out of the stages and you do the work as long as it takes. How long does it take? As long as it takes. And you know how you'll know when you're done? When you can accept it. Most of the time. And realize that anything can throw you back. Slowly, very slowly, we moved along those processes of grief together, Jimmy and I did. And Jimmy eventually improved. He could make it through the night. One of the hardest things about severe depression is what we call terminal insomnia. It's a horrible term. Terminal insomnia. I thought it was going to kill you. No, it means that it wakes you up. Your sleep terminates with insomnia. You can go to sleep, but you can't stay asleep. We call it terminal insomnia. I hate that. Look at the clock, it's 3 o'clock. That's not time to get up. What are you going to do at 3 o'clock? Nothing to do. I'm tempted to get up and drink a vodka, but that doesn't really help. You know, you hear me. I hear that. Benadryl? Yeah. I start with Benadryl. Yeah. Then the whole next day is shot for me. Now, there's no end run around. You got to deal with the feelings. That means sometimes at 3 o'clock you're going to get up and pray. You're going to get up and read that Bible that you don't want to read, or talk to that God that you're mad at. Right? You've got work to do. And terminal insomnia is a part of depression, meaning it wakes you up. We usually say you can't go to sleep, that's anxiety. You can't stay asleep, that's depression. There's a tip there. And sometimes you got both, right? His depression eventually lifted somewhat. He wasn't so bleak. He was never suicidal. That wasn't part of his thing. But life felt pointless. He dealt deeply with despair. And that somewhat lifted. He began to feel hopeful again. he returned to church activities. He could have conversations with well-meaning Christians who were giving him platitudes. He could kind of understand they were trying to help. They were trying to care for him. And he kind of got to that place where he could accept it, right? I could accept you guys as being imperfect, and sometimes you say stuff that you're trying to be helpful and it's not. Okay, it's not your fault. You just don't know how badly I'm hurting inside. He got to that place. It's hard. It's still trying to process the loss of so much love, but he's doing it better. And in doing all this, he's preparing his heart to love again. He's making room in his heart for new things, new activities, because he's doing the work. There's an interesting passage in Matthew 27. After Jesus died on the cross. Matthew 27, verses 50, 51. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook and the rocks were split. Now, most theologians interpret that passage as saying, well, the shield between the Temple of Temples and the Holy of Holies was torn open so that we all have access to God now. Jesus' death gave us all access to God. That's the theological interpretation of that. Jesus died so that you and I, we don't need a priest to go into the Holy of Holies. We can go there. All of you, as priesthood of all believers, you're all priests now because of Jesus' death. That's the theology of that. What if that curtain was actually God's clothes, clothing himself, he's in the Holy of Holies, and God was tearing his clothes in grief over the loss of his own son? What if that? Right? Like Jacob. God was so, even God knowing the end of the story, even God knowing that Jesus is going to live forever and be resurrected, still tore his clothes in grief. Maybe we have a God who suffers with us, right? The God who knows what it's like to lose a son too soon. To lose a 33-year-old son, that's just a crime, isn't it? Maybe God knows how bad you hurt, and he has suffered as you have suffered. Maybe you can have a conversation with that kind of God, right? God who knows. But God, you're going to, you know he knows. I know you know how bad this feels. You lost someone too that was very, very important to you. Even knowing the end of the story, we still grieve. We still grieve. Even knowing that my grandfather and my mom are in heaven, I still grieve the loss of them. It doesn't change the grief. I still have to grieve, right? In order for me to accept, I have to do the grief work. But there's a deeper form of sadness. The Bible calls it sadness of the heart. We call it clinical depression. I'm going to touch on that for just a minute. You may know someone who's had issues with this, and you might want to know about it. Nehemiah 2:2. Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of the heart. Even the Bible knew about this. There's a sadness of the heart that has nothing to do with your circumstances. It's just a clinical depression. There are two forms of depression. One we call endogenous, which means it's just in your blood, you inherit it. The other we call reactive, which means you're reacting to stuff in life that depresses you. So reactive depression means I've got depressing things in my life, I'm reacting, it makes me depressed. Endogenous depression means you're depressed and doesn't have anything to do with your circumstances. It's just in your blood. You're one of those people. I've got a guy that I've worked with, hopefully I'll have time to talk about him, who has been depressed his whole life. And he's tried everything. He's tried every antidepressant on the market. So we're back to MAO inhibitors, which most people don't even use because they're so complicated. It's the only thing that works for him. I know. It's the only thing that works for him. He's got endogenous depression. No matter how hard he tries, he's got to fight it with antidepressant medication. So that can happen to you. You can have a reactive depression, and actually, in our world today, we're seeing more reactive depressions than endogenous depressions. Isn't that interesting? You guys are living depressing lives. Your circumstances are getting to you. We used to see a greater percentage of endogenous depressions, 30, 40 years ago, and it shifted where the lives we're living are so stressful. We're all going, the population is now going to urban settings, and we're like rats trapped in this maze here, and we're depressing each other in the lives that we're living. And here's the sad news, the antidepressants are not as effective with reactive depressions. So don't feel bad if you've tried several antidepressants and they didn't really help that much. Probably got a large percentage of reactive depression in your life. That means you've got to do some work. You have to work the psychological part of your life. You've got to do the work to deal with your depression. But there's still, and sometimes you have both, and so you've got to deal with the endogenous depression with medication that essentially gets it.
Is reactive depression the same as situational depression?
Yeah. Your situations are depressing you, right? You know, I've got a relative that just irritates me to death, and I can't get rid of her, you know. A sister. Did I say sister? Did I say that out loud? Did I say that out loud? Thank you. Every time she calls, it's a new problem, you know. At least she stopped asking for money, so. Let me tell you about one. Sorry, hard-working guy, works out, physical, great strength, you know. He's my age, but he looks 20 years younger than me because he works out so much. He still goes on 100-mile bicycle runs with 2 artificial hips. Yeah, I know.
That's the only reason you can do it.
That's artificial hips, right? I know.
You wouldn't be able to do that.
Exactly. With my hip, I couldn't do it. His,
Big ones work better.
it's better for cycling. For cycling. This gives you a little insight into this guy, right? Hard-working guy. He's the guy that suffers from endogenous depression his whole life. Now, he's a guy who works hard, but he could not live without his antidepressants. He couldn't. He tries to wean off, every few years he'll try to wean off, and he drops into horrible suicidal depression. He goes back on his depression. He's one of those guys who suffers with it. He's able to conquer almost everything in life except for the fact that he's got a clinical depression. He's embracing that and trying to learn how to live well with it, and he does live pretty well. He works out at the gym a lot, so he's really buff. You know, guy in his 60s who looks buff. I think it's a good look. You know, we should all work out. And he first did therapy as 2 fingers of help. I don't know if you guys work out at the gym, but when guys are working out at the gym and they're lifting weights, they're doing bench press on the back, the guy that's spotting them to keep the weights from falling in, but they just do it with 2 fingers. Because we want him to lift most of the weight. So I'll stand behind him, and just with 2 fingers go like this. All you need is just a little bit of help to get that weight up, right? He refers to therapy as 2 fingers of help. I just need to give me a little bit of help. I want to do it myself. I want to do the work myself, but sometimes I just need those 2 fingers of help. I just need you to help me do what I can, for a little bit I can't do. I need you to help me with that. So think about that. Sometimes you're dealing with people who are struggling with depression or something else in their life, and you think, well, what good am I going to do? I mean, I have no much to say. You know, I don't know what to say. Maybe you're just giving them just that 2 fingers of help. Just that one thing you said, that one comment, that kindness, just saying hello to them, just stop by their house. Maybe that was just the 2 fingers that they needed to get over the hump. We offer that to each other in times of need. His endogenous depression is what Nehemiah called sadness of the heart. It's the kind that's just in there. Not ill. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not sick, but you've got this in your blood, and you need to take responsibility for it. I'm a strong believer in antidepressant medications for these types of problems. The therapy helps. It's the 2 fingers of help that he needs. But without the antidepressant medication, he's dead. He's dead. I mean, his suicidal effects are serious. He owns guns. Let me say that. It's a scary person to own guns. So we do our work. He takes his medication, and he lives a pretty solid life. And for one, actually, and we come back to this often, when he tries to go off his meds and becomes seriously suicidally depressed, he has a son, right? And that's all it needs. He said, wait a minute, what about your son? How will your son deal with life with you killing yourself, right? And that just jogs him out of it. It's like, no, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. One was adopted, so he never knew his real father, which is part of the problem because we really don't know his history, his medical history. You know, there's a history of depression that he doesn't know. He was adopted, right? So his goal in life is to live with integrity so that his son will be able to look up to a father who was a success in life. And a success in life, for one, means not killing yourself. Right? You don't want to leave your son with that. You don't want to leave your son. And he's succeeding. So then what happens with our thinking when we're depressed, when we're sad? Either the sadness that comes with intense grief, sadness that comes with clinical depression, or just the kind of sadness that comes in and out of all of our lives. You all get a little bit depressed, as I said earlier, because you're living depressing lives. We're stressing ourselves out. So you're going to go in and out of this sadness. It affects your thinking. Psalms 13, verse 2. How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and every day have sorrow in my heart? If you're wrestling with sadness, it changes your thinking. We know that it creates concentration problems. If you have difficulty remembering things, sadness does that. And the main reason is because it's not really affecting your memory, it's affecting your attention. So you think you're paying attention, you go out later and you think, what did that person say? And you think, oh man, I'm losing my mind. No, you weren't able to pay attention. It never got into your memory because your sadness creates concentration difficulties. So you couldn't concentrate and focus on what was being said, so you think you've got a memory problem with a concentration problem. And sometimes it's hard to know the difference between the two. Yes?
Does unexpressed anger create depression?
That's the one I'm going to end on. Yes. Yeah. Unexpressed anger. Anger turned inward leads to depression. And hopefully I have time for that one too. Yes, the answer is yes. What are the classical, what we call cognitive distortions? I don't like that phrase, but what are the changes in thinking that happen with depression? Catastrophizing. That's when you turn a small mishap into a mountain of calamity. So if you're struggling with sadness, you're going to catastrophize. You know, somebody cuts you off, and that wrecked my day. I can't believe you cut me off. You kind of speed up, you know, you're trying to let them know that you're mad at them. You're catastrophizing, right? He cut you off. He didn't see you there. He wasn't insulting you. Second thing, personalize things. You take things personally when you're sad. Somebody will make a comment, and you think they're making a comment about you. Or you see people talking, and you're sure they're talking about you. You take things personally much more than you should when you're depressed. Not everything is directed at you, but you think it is. And of course, this doesn't help your depression, right? It makes you more depressed. I think they're gossiping about you, right? Believe me, people are not thinking about you as much as you think they're thinking about you. You're not that important, that's right. They're thinking, how do I look? Do I look okay? Did I say the right thing just now? Did I? I wonder if I said the right thing. They're thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about you. Catastrophize, you make mountains out of molehills, you personalize, you take things personally. Stop doing that. You know, that's really affecting your happiness. You jump to conclusions, you get a little bit of evidence, you skip the middle part, and you go right to the conclusion. Well, I know what you mean by that. I know what you mean. I know where you're going with that. So that's a lot of marriage counseling that I do. People start, and they go, oh, well, I know. Wait. I know what you meant by that. Really? No, you don't. Let them finish their thought. Then conclude what you want to do. All or nothing thinking, it's black or white. Do this or that. You're either with me or you're against me. These are all things we do as a result of our concentration difficulties when you're struggling with sadness, deep sadness. Your attention span is shorter, and sadness makes it hard for you to sort out the nuances of things. When people are talking to you, you hear this wah, 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 you know, Charlie Brown, wah. You're depressed. And so you can't nuance out what they're trying to get at, and you jump to conclusions, catastrophize, take things personally. So know that those are side effects of sadness, of deep sadness. And we go in and out, either clinical depression or just a garden variety, everyday kind of sadness, and sadness that comes with grief. All those things can happen. So let me tell you about Amanda. Came to therapy after her mother died. And she had a close relationship with her mother, so this was a sad thing, and she wanted to do her grief work. I think that's smart. Let's do our work. Because you can talk about your grief with people, sort of. But after a certain point, you kind of get the feeling they don't want to hear about it anymore, right? You know why? Because it brings up their sadness. And they're like, oh man, I hadn't thought about this in years, and now you're bringing up my sadness. And so they change the subject on you. You know? How about those canes? You know? What? I'm talking about I lost my dad. And so you figure that out, and so you either go to a grief work where you're a group where everyone's agreed that we're going to talk about sadness, or you go to therapy where that's what we do. You know, full hour, undivided attention, you can talk about whatever you want. We're going to focus on that for as long as it takes. And like I said, sometimes it takes years. So you got to do the work as long as it takes. So she came. Wasn't complicated, with regrets or unfinished business. It was only her mom. She hadn't lost anyone else close to her for years. So the grief work was pretty straightforward. It was still work you had to do. And it went well. As it turned out, Amanda's problem wasn't really with the grief over the loss of her mother. It was the grief that she felt over the presence of her father, who was still alive. So sometimes losing one parent exposes the difficulties with the other parent. Where dad was kind of hiding behind mom for years. She didn't have to deal with her dad, but now that mom was gone, she had to deal with dad. And that was depressing her. So we found that the depression in her life wasn't from the one she lost, it was from the parent she didn't lose. Sometimes the good ones go first. He was judgmental and punitive with her growing up. And with mother gone, she was forced to deal with the man that she and her sister called Lizard Man growing up. Yeah, he was kind of cold and unfeeling and by the rules kind of guy. And this was now depressing her. She had to deal with her dad, and it was difficult. Not only deprived of warmth and nurturance of her mother, now she had to deal with an invalidating father. And he invalidated her for having feelings in the first place. So how do you go to him and talk about the sadness of losing mom, and here's a guy that really didn't believe in feelings? I mean, who says that? I don't believe in feelings. It's like I don't believe in air. You don't get to choose that. They exist. Either you don't want to deal with them or not, but you can't not believe in them. She was a sensitive child, and so she grew up feeling punished for just being the way that she was around her father. She said, my sister and I used to call him the Lizard Man behind his back. And I said, how come? She said, lizards are kind of scary and cold-blooded, and you don't think of them as having feelings. That's my dad. And I was kind of moved by this kind of contradiction, this thing that she was saying, the longing to be cared for, and yet this cold, invalidating response to her. And so I know I had a look of surprise on my face when she said that. Who calls her dad Lizard Man, right? I had some look on my face that was in response to that, right? And she jerked back. I was thinking, how could any father be so unloving? I've got a daughter, I can't imagine treating her this way. She said, she looks at my face, she goes, you think I'm awful? I'm still back on how could a father be unloving, and she said, you think I'm awful? I said, I do. And she said, I saw that look on your face. I know what that means. You think I'm an ungrateful daughter for saying such cruel things about my father. How hard he worked to support our family. You hear her mother's words there. How hard your father works to support this family. You can hear it coming out of him. She had to be her mom now, because now. And that's how our sessions would go. I'd have a reaction, she would personalize it, she would feel criticized, she would jump to conclusions, she would catastrophize. Defending myself was useless, because I know what you meant. When people say that, you just look defensive, and you say, well, that's not what I meant. We just had to deal with the fact that that's what she believed I meant, with that look on my face. Right? She would offer an intimate insight into her feelings. I would have a reaction, sometimes ever so slightly. I tried to tone it down, but I'm expressive, and you figure that out. It comes out. Right? And then she would assume that I was attacking her and drawing a negative, catastrophic conclusion about her. She was depressed. She couldn't help personalizing things and jumping to conclusions. It wasn't fun for either of us. But we dealt with her sadness. And we dealt with it for as long as it took. We'd go in and out, in and out, in and out of things. And she would have all these reactions to me, and I would have to embrace them and make a big enough space for me to be so critical of her. That's what she felt. And yet I still have learned to see her next week. You think I'm awful. Okay, how's Thursday? Good for you? See you Thursday. And that's what was different. It's like, wait a minute, you think I'm awful, but you still want to talk to me? I mean, you don't. So finally we were able to get through that. Where my still being there for her convinced her that maybe I thought there was some value in our relationship, some value in her. And we were gradually, as her depression started to lift, she thought I was less critical of her all of a sudden. It took months, but we were able to work through the all or nothing thinking, jumping to conclusions, personalizing things, and she's beginning to entertain more flexible thoughts. Now I can have a look on my face and it might mean lots of things. She might, instead of saying, I know what you mean, she'll say, what were you thinking just now? You turn it around, open up a little space there for subjectivity, we call it. You're feeling something, but maybe I don't know what it is. I could tell her depression was starting to lift, where she wasn't making things so black and white in her thinking. God has made us with an amazing capacity for thinking, but sometimes when we're depressed, we use that thinking against ourselves. We see things that aren't there, we feel things other people are not feeling, we jump to conclusions that they haven't even thought of, right? That's a part of your depression. Be aware of that. Psalms 13, verse 2, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? Well, as long as it takes. And hopefully you'll have people in your life who are willing to go through that with you and do the work. It's work. And do the work to work through the sadness in your life. This is a wonderful capacity, but if we stay focused on working through the feelings, we can work through the catastrophizing, the taking things personally, the jumping to conclusions. We can work that stuff through because it's driven by emotions, right? So if you just stay focused on the emotions, don't argue with the thoughts, because those are all colored by the depression. Just stay focused on the sadness, the anger, the bargaining, the depression. You work through you do the work. Don't get sidetracked by the thinking. I think we're not rational people, we're rationalizing people. You just think you're rational. You're not. We now know that the emotional part of the brain is 5 times faster than the thinking part of the brain. So you're feeling things long before you're thinking things. And then you come up with thoughts to rationalize why you feel the way you feel. I don't like that guy. Why? Well, let me tell you why. You have to think of the reasons, right? You just don't have to feel. Right? So know that your work is in your heart more than your head. That's where your work, real work is. Let me talk about anger. Yes. Sometimes anger turned inward leads to depression. Even if I caused you sorrow in my letter, I don't regret it. I see that my letter hurt you, but it hurt you only for a little while. 2 Corinthians 7. Paul was aware that his style would often make people angry. I'm sure he was a bit contentious. You really read Paul's letters and tried to see if you can pick out his personality, you know? He wasn't warm and fuzzy. Big times rather blunt, a little misogynistic, I don't know. But he was greatly used by the church, and he knew that anger sometimes is something that happens, but then you get it out. You express it. You don't go inward. Anger turned inward leads to depression. Anger turned inward leads to depression. Now, there are many reasons people don't want to express their anger. It's not socially acceptable often. If you were to stand up and start screaming at me right now, you'd look a little weird. So there are certain settings where we think, okay, we're too genteel really to express our anger that much. You feel out of control when you get really angry. I don't like to feel out of control, so I don't want to get mad. Or you just don't like the feeling of anger. I don't like it, so I don't express it. So we've got all these reasons why we want to hold it in and not express it. But the habit of not expressing your anger runs the risk of turning it into depression. If you habitually go inward with your anger. We all restrain it at times, right? But if you develop the habit of going inward with your anger, that brings with it depression. Sadness is an emotion that comes and goes. It's part of life, so is anger. If your goal is to never be sad, once again, that's the goal of a dead person. If your goal is to never be mad, that's the goal of a dead person. You're not a dead person, you're a live person. It means you're going to be sad, you're going to be mad. It's part of life. Paul tells us in Philippians, in your anger, do not sin, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Now, what he's saying is psychologically, anger is energy to solve a problem. That's what it is. Anger is energy to solve a problem. That's what anger is. So you direct the energy to solve the problem. That's why you don't want the sun to go down on it. It's meant to be a short-term burst of energy to solve a problem. That's what anger is. God's mad all throughout the Old Testament. Jesus got mad in the New Testament. It can't be a sin. What you do with it can be. Paul's warning us, don't sin with your anger. But anger itself isn't. It's energy to solve a problem. Express the energy in a healthy and straightforward way. Let me tell you about Charles. Charles grew up in a small rural town in Arkansas. Arguments there were often settled with fistfights. There's this one incident he talks about where his group of boys were fighting with another group of boys, and that escalated to rock throwing, and that escalated to BB guns, and that escalated to small caliber bullet firing at each other, which got settled by the sheriff when he rolled into town. You get the flavor, right, how he grew up. His father told him, always wear long sleeve shirts, because you don't want the other guy to know how strong your arms are, because you need that in fight. You may need that advantage. So that's a little bit of his background. He grew up, moved to a large city, became an engineer at a sophisticated company, and he rose to the top. because he's a very, very smart guy. And he's a victim of what we call the Peter principle. You know what that is? Where people keep advancing you, and you keep advancing up until you can't do your job anymore because you don't have the skills you need. You're really good at this level, but he was really not so good at managing people. I mean, when you're in a large organization, you've got 200 engineers working for you, you don't solve fights with fist fights, right? You don't take them outside. You know, you have to learn how to be sophisticated in your conversation, solving those kinds of disagreements, and he was not well equipped for that. He's not a psychologically sophisticated guy. Very intelligent, very good at his job, not so good at dealing with those kinds of complicated, sophisticated psychological conversations with large groups of people. So he would come home mumbling every night, you know, mumbling under his breath. He would fall asleep smoking cigarettes in his Barca lounger watching TV. You know, everybody just kind of gave him a lot of space, you know, live around the guy. Because he couldn't solve the conflicts of work the way he needed to. It's not that he would never get angry, too. He would burst into a rage when something frustrated him. You know, if one of the kids did something he didn't like, he'd scream and yell at him. And you could tell, where is this coming from? You know, I mean, I think his wife, who wanted to take him to therapy for help, was dealing with these rages all the time. They did significant things, right? But the lion's share of his frustration and his anger and the energy to solve a problem was at work. We had all these people counting on him to deal with their human relations problems that he had no idea how to deal with. He kept that inside. And so he suffered from serious depression because he just kept bottling up his anger. Every day he'd come home mad and stuffing it all day long. Anger turned inward leads to sadness. And the habit of turning your anger inward leads to depression. So he lived a lifetime of depression and never got help for it because it saw it as a weakness to get help of any kind. And that was a sad part of his life. He ended up not using his anger as energy to solve the problem, but turning it inward and being a very depressed man that was disconnected from his kids and his wife. And there's only so much we could do to help him because I can't help you if you're not in the room, right? I could help his wife, but Charles wouldn't come in, so I couldn't help him. He died at age 65, which in my mind is quite young. He said to his wife, I don't want to be a burden on society. He smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. He knew it was going to kill him. He didn't want to be a burden on society. Think about that. He didn't want to collect Social Security. He didn't want to, you know, he saw that the system's upside down. And I don't want to be a burden on society. I'm happy to pay in for other people, but I don't want to be a burden on society. It's like depressed thinking, isn't it? So you're going to check out. That's your solution. Check out. Anger turned inward leads to depression, and depression colors your thinking. There are helps. We have help for all these emotions now. And you can help each other with these emotions. Sometimes you're the just 2 fingers of help that someone needs in your life. You think someone's lost someone dear to them, you think, gosh, I wouldn't know what to say to them. It doesn't matter. Just go over, say hello. What you say to them is not important. The fact that you're talking to them is. Just don't use platitudes. And just try to be real. And that helps us as we process through our emotions and grief. Well, those are my thoughts. I know we probably have time for a couple of questions. If anyone wants to ask one, I'd be happy to respond to that. And again, all this is in the book on spiritualism. I'll read about that later. Any questions or stories you want to tell? I put in my next book. I'm always open. I will use somebody else's name. Yes?
Can you repeat that expression about having problems going to sleep and then can't sleep waking up? Which one is the question?
Anxiety is trouble going to sleep. Depression is a result of waking up to sleep. It's not 100% true, but if you wake up, you have terminal insomnia, it's often a sign of depression, which means you're waking up at 3 or 4 every night. You can't go back to sleep. If you're staring at the alarm clock every morning before it rings, maybe suffering from depression, maybe. And again, sometimes it's a reactive depression, so it doesn't need medication necessarily, but you might need to be talking about it and processing through the feelings. Anxiety is trouble going to sleep, depression is trouble staying asleep. Not a hard and fast rule, just a little bit, and you can have both. Yes?
Is the PTSD
Yes.
only experienced after a war zone?
No.
Or also,
Now, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, we discovered it as a result of the Vietnam War. We used to call it shell shock in World War II. And then when we found, we talked about this last week, we found that more men and women committed suicide after they came home from the Vietnam War than we actually walked into the Vietnam War. We realized that we had a problem with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. People suffering flashbacks, nightmares, serious depression, suicidal ideation. And now we have a little treatment for that. It's very difficult. But no, you can suffer from PTSD from any trauma. Any trauma. It doesn't have to be war. But it's often a trauma where loss of life is threatened, either yours or someone else's. That's often the case, but it doesn't have to be. Rape is another reason people suffer terribly from PTSD. This is great. I'll talk about that in another chapter. Any other questions? Anybody want to diagnose a family member? Already done that? All right, good for you. You're well on your way. All right, well, I'm going to hang out afterwards. If you've got any questions you want to talk to me, I'll hang out for a little while longer. Thank you.